everybody. My name's Dr. Angela Winter with Horn and More, and this is our holiday issue, which is really special. And I'm so excited to have Dr. Anneke Scott join us today. Um, for those of you that may be discovering Dr. Scott's work for the first time, she's widely recognized as one of the leading voices in historical horn performance. Her career spans from Baroque and classical natural horn traditions to virtuosic 19th century repertoire. She's served as principal horn to some of the world's most respected period instrument ensembles. Her recordings, research, and educational work have helped really bridge the gap between historical performance practices and the modern horn. Um, of course, many of us here at IHS might remember that she was also awarded the International Horn Society's Punto Award for Distinguished Service back in 2019. Anneke, you're currently joining us from Amsterdam. I think you just got to
Yes.
Amsterdam because you're in the middle of a very full season of projects that's taken you on stages all across Europe and beyond. So I'm so excited to have you here today and so thankful for your time. So welcome.
Hey, my pleasure.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about sort of your origin story. So you grew up in Birmingham and you discovered natural horn in maybe kind of an interesting way. Can you tell, and at an interesting time too, can you tell
Mhm.
us a little bit about how you sort of came to the natural horn?
Yeah. So I'm from Birmingham in the UK, and I was really lucky growing up in Birmingham. Quite a lot of our audience will be familiar with Simon Rachtel. He was the conductor of the City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra at the time, and Birmingham was a great place to grow up as a young musician because the provision for young musicians was astounding. Like basically everybody who went to school had the opportunity to learn instruments for free, and also to play in ensembles. So, I mean, it's great learning a musical instrument, but I think a lot of people will recognize from their own development it's all about playing with other musicians. So one of the things that was great about growing up in Birmingham was the opportunities we had to be in ensembles and orchestras and everything. And one of the other things about Birmingham, I think it's still there, was the rag market, which was a sort of part of the city, which would have different sort of markets on different days. And the chap who was my horn teacher at the time had picked up a piston horn. Now, if our audience today isn't familiar with the piston horns, they're the French design of instrument, the sort of instrument that Dennis Brain started his career on. And it was the type of horn that we played in the United Kingdom right up until the mid 20th century. And so they were really common, lots of them available. And my teacher was also the chap who would do like lots of instrument repairs. So he'd picked up this piston horn. It was a bit broken. So he turned it into a natural horn by taking the pistons off it. And I think the next time I turned up for a horn lesson, I was about 17 at the time. Um, I was learning like the Beethoven sonata and works like this. And my teacher just gave me this thing and said, I think you'll get on with this. And I was left to my own devices to work it out. And that was my first interaction with the natural horn. And I just fell in love with it. I loved the challenge of it. And I think this whole thing about having to work something out for yourself is a really useful tool. So that was how I got into natural horn playing. And it was not long afterwards that I was doing my music college auditions in the UK. And I was so intrigued by this instrument that my decision as to where I wanted to go and study formally was very much based on where am I going to have the opportunities to learn the natural horn. So that was my way in initially.
That's so interesting. So just from a repair person that did repairs, sort of a horn that had a valvectomy on it.
Yeah, yeah,
It sort of changed the trajectory or shaped the
yeah,
trajectory of your whole career.
yeah,
And I think I read somewhere that this was, you said you were 17, but and you
yeah,
figured this out sort of for yourself. And wasn't this
yeah,
right before you were taking auditions and then you
yeah, yeah. It was like I remember getting I remember lying in my audition because Pip Easter was on my panel, and he said, "How long have you been playing natural horn?" And I had only been playing a matter of weeks, and I lied and said, "Oh, 6 months." Because I thought if I said about 6 weeks, they would think I was being disrespectful. it felt like, so I remember sort of fudging the truth and saying it was longer because I didn't want them to think that I was being sort of flippant about the audition process, you know. So yeah, that was. But I mean, I think a lot of people will have had that experience of when we're trying to learn the natural horn for the first time, we gravitate towards pieces that we already know. So yes, I was playing the Beethoven Sonata and things like that. So yeah, that was the way in.
Yeah, I think that for the limited experience I've had with it, I think that that's a perfect first piece. The Beethoven Sonata is a perfect first piece for that.
It's an interesting one. I find that there is a disadvantage to starting with the Beethoven, which is it's in the key of F.
Mhm.
And we're so shaped by that. That's so much the prism that we're used to seeing things as horn players, that one of the things is that we often gravitate towards playing something like the Beethoven Sonata. Another piece that a lot of people like to start off with is the first Cherubini Sonata or the Sanson Romance in F. And in a way, it's good if we can sort of move away from that prism early on, because it shapes so much of how we conceive of the instrument. And I know that a lot of people, when they first start playing the natural horn, they find as soon as you go into a crook that is an F, it can be a little discombobulating at first.
Oh, that's so interesting. So it's rather disorienting then, and it's maybe better to just start with it being more different than more similar.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah, exactly. It sort of just breaks you away from it forces you to engage with the instrument in a different way. And rather than, it's very easy for us to take a lot of our knowledge from the modern horn onto the natural horn um, automatically, which has some advantages. So I often find that I like to encourage people to go towards a different crook early on.
It's you mentioned taking sort of our knowledge from the modern horn to
Mm.
the natural horn. But one thing I'm curious about, because I think one thing I really appreciate about some of the things I've seen you do or talk about is that you can really inform your modern horn playing or modern horn players from from um, playing natural horn. So,
Mm.
in your experience, what are some of the significant ways that playing a historical horn has informed your approach, or that you might tell some of our listeners to approaching their modern instrument?
I think one of the things that a lot of people are aware of and often get really excited about when they first experience the natural horn is, of course, the timbre differences that we get from the open and stop notes. But I would like to encourage people to explore the other thing, which is the timbre that comes from the different crooks. And I think it's one of the things that, so for example, at the moment, I'm on a tour playing Brahms Symphony No. 1. And we've got the C basso crooks that start that symphony for the first pair of horns. And then we've got E major for the second movement, E flat for the third, and then back to C for the first pair for the last movement. And those different colors that we can get bring such a dimension to the playing we are doing. So, sort of the darker tones that we get with the basso crooks and the mercurial bright tones that we get with the alto crooks. And again, coming back to the whole thing about how we quite often get really excited about the right hand technique and the ramifications of using that. I often find myself focusing so much on the open harmonics of the instrument, because that is the basis of the instrument, and it's the basis of what helps us to have good intonation. So I'm a bit in my approach to the instrument. I'm a bit obsessed with intonation, And I think it's one of those things that by playing the natural horn, you start to have an understanding of harmony, a real deep understanding of harmony. You need to, because it's what's going to help the pitching of the instrument. So I think it's very often that people are really interested in the natural horn from the point of the right hand technique, but I would encourage people to think about the crooks, the timbres associated, and to really use the instrument as a way to understand the harmony of the music that we're playing.
Oh, and then that translates into maybe a deeper understanding, even just of the music. So on
Yeah,
our modern instruments, I see. Oh, that's so interesting.
very much so. Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, I think one thing about horn is because most of us, I think all of us have, I shouldn't say all of us, but most of us do learn it from, the valved horn. That's how we begin.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're so used to this sort of homogenization of sound and of key area. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a wonderful sort of insight to that we can celebrate sort of uh, the difference, the uniqueness, not just of timbres with the
Mm,
stop notes versus open notes, but also the uniqueness of key areas.
mm.
Really
One
interesting.
of the things, it's fascinating you say that, because one of the things that immediately brings to my mind is I still think this is one of my favorite moments of music. I love playing Beethoven. I love playing Beethoven symphonies, and I always adore there's two times he does this trick in the Eroica, the first movement and the last movement. The moment where the first horn switches from E flat to F, and some horn player must have briefed Beethoven that we need a lot of time to change crook, because you've got some like 46 bars beforehand to change into F. And it must have been like witchcraft. It must have been like magic for the audiences of Beethoven's period. You're listening to a symphony in E flat, and especially because it's Beethoven, he's going to go into all sorts of key areas. But that moment where you change from E flat to F, da, 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 and then when it goes into the flute line, audiences of the time would have heard that and go, "What is a horn doing there?" We're now, the harmony has gone elsewhere. The horns can't go there because they're in E flat. So he gets to change crook, and just the change from, E flat is such it's a beloved key for us horn players, but it's got a nobility about it. It's got a depth to it, and F is just that little bit more bright. So that moment where suddenly a horn is somewhere it should not be, and just the clarity of the F crook versus the E flat of the rest of the movement. So yeah, it's that sort of thing which I think the natural horn can help us with our modern horn playing. So when you're playing something like that, just to try for a brighter timbre in your modern horn playing.
Gosh, that's such a beautiful answer. I think that might shape the way I listen to
Yeah,
things, actually.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
We every so often we end up somewhere that we're not supposed to be, and the composers know what they're doing.
Well, okay. So for someone that's interested a little bit, that maybe doesn't have, I'm thinking somebody just going through maybe even a public school situation and in primary school that's starting out on a valved instrument like many of us do. And maybe we're curious. We want to dip a toe in, and maybe we don't live in a place where we have access to somebody
Mhm.
that's a specialist on period instruments, or where we could even go hear a period orchestra in person. But we're curious and we want to know where to begin. For these students that can't easily attend workshops or master classes, could you recommend a starting point, maybe some beginner-friendly resources, recordings, books, or sample exercises? Like, how would somebody get started?
We have access to the natural horn through a standard double. And I think that it's quite common for people to have had experiences of open harmonic exercises. So, for example, when I was a teenager, I grew up on the Farkas book. So, doing those open harmonic exercises at the beginning of the Phil Farkas book. So we have access to the instrument, the natural horn, through the valves of our modern horns. So the first thing I would encourage people to consider doing is, start to really think about that when you're, for example, doing your warm-up, especially if there's open harmonic exercises in it. And one of the things that we can do is, for example, if you're playing in some sort of orchestral project, is to start using the valves. It's also, it gives you a different understanding of transposition, for example. So if you're playing in an orchestra that's doing, say, a Beethoven or a Haydn or a Mozart symphony, instead of sitting there and doing all the transposition, try out putting down the valve combination for that crook. So first valve, in the States, do you stand in B flat or F? What's
In
the
the States,
general?
most of us stand in F, so it would be, F,
Mhm.
E, E flat. Most of us stand in F.
Yeah. Yeah. So exactly that whole thing, to sort of use the valves as crooks. So if the piece is in E flat, just stick down your first valve and start trying to play pieces like that. The slight disadvantage of the modern horn, and I always think about this when people are discussing a piece like Villanelle. If you're playing the first page of Villanelle on a modern double, it's not designed to be using the right hand like you would have done on a French piston horn of the late 19th, early 20th century. But you can start to get an idea of how the technique works on a modern double. So I would say find repertoire that you're doing with other people, use the valves like a crooking device, and dip your toe in that way. One of the things that I need to get my act together on is there are some exercises by Mariani, which I use a lot. A few years ago, I wrote a book about natural horn playing, which is now sold out, and there is going to be a reprint probably in 2027. And there's some exercises in there which I really like, because they're open harmonics, they're very melodious. But things like, for example, if you look at Oscar France, there's quite a few pages at the beginning of that. The Franz Strauss natural horn exercises. Find something which is mostly to do with the open harmonics and start there. That would be the place to start, I would suggest.
Excellent. So thinking of our valves as just fast as crook changes as
Yeah,
you go from there. And I
exactly.
just also like to remind when we go back to the beginning when you said how you were
Yeah,
introduced, your teacher said basically, if I remember, you've just figured it out. So
yeah.
as far as what does happen with the right hand,
Mhm.
just figure it out.
Because part of the reason I like this is, and I do this with my own teaching, I don't like to hand out hand position charts.
Mhm.
And there's a reason for that. And it's fascinating if you look at the old books, the old treatises on how to play the natural horn, you can see that they struggled to explain some of the intricacies. And it's part of the problem that we often have with teaching wind instruments, where so much stuff happens inside. So if you think about our breath, if you think about our tongue, there's so much that goes on with playing a wind instrument, which goes on inside the body. And then on the natural horn, you've got this thing which is, and then our hand is hidden in the bell of the instrument. So it's not like with the valves where, if you're teaching somebody playing a modern horn and you can see that they're putting the wrong fingers down. With the natural horn, because so much of what we do is hidden, it's difficult to put in writing an explanation of exactly what we're doing. And so you see when they're explaining what the hand positions are, that there's sort of trends in how they do it. So some people will put fractions, so one for fully stopped, half, things like that. Some people do like colored in circles. So open circle would be an open note, colored in circle. Some put little descriptions. Oh, this one, it's quite stopped. It's like this note. So you can see that there are different ways that they're trying to explain the same information. Now, we're all different. We're all physically different. Some people have big hands, some people have small hands. We're often playing different horns, and then you've got the things about the different crooks have sort of different responses. So putting a chart together for the hand positions, yes, they follow the same pattern, but it's kind of a rather primitive way of explaining what we're doing. So I think what's much better, and this is coming back to the whole thing about intonation, what's much better is to listen to what's going on. So you're playing an A here. Is it in tune? If it's a bit flat, then you're going to have to open your hand out a little bit. If it's a bit sharp, you might want to close your hand a little bit. But is it in tune? If it's not, do something with your hand to make sure that this note is in tune. So that's why I don't like doing hand position charts, because if we start to go, oh, that's a half stop note, then we sort of stop listening and we start doing this sort of on-off thing with our right hand. So it's better to have this sort of feedback loop where you're going, okay, so this note, it's not an open harmonic, so it's going to have to be I'm going to have to do something with my hand. Okay, if I do that, is it in tune? If not, adjust your hand position. And then that means that if you're playing, for example, the basso low crooks and the alto high crooks, we often have to nuance the hand technique a little bit. So instead of going half, three quarters, open, shut, is it in tune? If not, do something about it. And that's your hand position. So that sort of thing about having to work things out yourself, you're having to listen to what you're doing and correct or keep it as it is if you're happy with it. I think that's really an important thing for us as musicians to be doing, to be listening to what we're doing and adjusting accordingly.
Well, that definitely sounds like it has gifts for modern valve instrument as well,
Yeah, yeah,
because we should be doing that there too. If anything, a fingering
mm,
chart is the blunt tool that you're talking about that might not be
yeah,
as nuanced as our ears.
yes, yeah,
Awesome.
exactly. Yeah.
Well, in that, so let's say somebody has sort of dipped a toe in and they're really interested, sort of like you were, and they've decided I would like to study. This is something I'd actually
Mhm.
like to pursue. Um, it almost seems crazy enough to decide to make a living as a horn player in the modern world, but many of us have done it. But even do something more niche seems even a bit more obscure to some of us. Where are some places that we could study if we did want to pursue this professionally? I know that you teach, so could you give us a little insight on
Yeah.
where we might look?
So it's it's interesting. One of the bits of feedback that I got when I was studying. So I studied first in London, and then I studied in France and Holland. And uh, I think, speaking from a sort of European perspective, um, one of the pieces of advice I got, uh, which I kind of ignored, was that for an older generation of musicians working in HIP, so if you're not familiar with the term HIP, it's historically informed performance, period performance, and an older generation learnt on the job, because in the 80s and 90s, it was a huge growth in interest in period instrument groups. And for example, there is one of the recordings which I grew up on and absolutely loved was Roger Norrington's complete Beethoven cycle with the London Classical Players. And there's huge listing of horn players on in the CD liner notes. And there was a couple of people listed there. And I remember speaking to one of them, and I said, I didn't know you did natural horn. And they said, no, I don't. That was the one and only time I did it. And that they'd been given an instrument and told, can I play it? So there was a generation that was learning on the job. And in a way, a sort of victim of their own success. It's the level got better and better and better. And then it meant that for generations like mine, we couldn't learn on the job because the standard was now there. So in order for us to get into the professional world, we needed to be working at a level that was now the professional level. So we have now quite a few really good places to study period instruments. So I teach in Den Haag, in The Hague, here in Holland, and it's a very, very large early music department, which is able to offer bachelor's and master's as first study instruments. So there's a lot of institutions where you can do it as a second study. So you'll be doing your modern horn, but you will be also doing natural horn as a second or auxiliary or minor. So there are some places in the States. I've always been a huge fan of the work that Rick Sarafonoff has been doing in Indiana. That's a very good center for study. You've got Todd Williams at Juilliard. Juilliard's got a good program. Also, there's the sort of places in Europe. Basel is highly regarded. You've got the department at Paris. But Den Haag has got a really excellent program of study. So, for example, one of the things that I would always encourage, if you're looking to study natural horn or any period instrument seriously, find an institution that's got enough other people doing it. Because one of the challenges we have as natural horn players is we start with your classical repertoire. We start with your Mozarts, your Beethovens, your Haydns. If you do well, then you'll get the opportunity to go and do your Bach and Handel and Vivaldi. We don't normally start with the Baroque horn. We normally start with the classical horn. But most other instruments will start, if you're a violin player, you'll start with your Baroque violin. If you're a flute player, you'll start playing your Bach and things like that. And if you do well, then you go into the classical repertoire. So if you're looking to study natural horn, find somewhere where there's enough people studying it that you will have the opportunities to do chamber music and orchestras. Because if there's not a lot of other people studying period instruments, you might have enough string players to do a Baroque orchestra, but they're never going to get as far as the late 18th century. So that's why, some of these institutions I've just mentioned, certainly in Den Haag, the students I've got there, they're doing wind quintets, quartets, harmony music bands, in addition to doing the orchestras. And of course, that's the experience that you want to be getting, is somewhere that you can do as much repertoire with other musicians rather than just your one-to-one lessons with your professor. So those are the things to look out for, the places that will give you those opportunities.
That's great advice. Thank you. So you do also give, in addition to your formal teaching, in Holland, you give master classes all over the world, and you also have lots of recordings. Can you tell us, sort of as we're about to say goodbye, can you tell us how we could connect with you, how we could find you, how
Oh,
we could find where
easily.
you're doing your things?
Okay, so the easiest ways to keep tabs on me, my website, annekescott.com, has information about how to get hold of me. I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, I've got YouTube channel. Those are the places to get hold of me. I also do have a mailing list, and that normally goes out sort of twice a year. If people are sort of wanting to know about concerts and masterclasses, probably the mailing list is a good way to go, because I tend to find on the social media, I tend to find that I'm normally posting things in real time, and then people go, "I wish I'd known about this." It's like, okay, so the mailing list is probably a good way of finding out what's on the horizon, and social media is probably a good way of getting in touch or finding out where in the world I am right now.
And I do love your posts on social media, your horns in art and horns in museum. That's one of my favorite
Yeah.
things.
Yes, thank you.
Well, thank you so much. So this is our December issue. So it's our
Yeah.
holiday issue. And you have given us quite a little holiday treat. So our listeners will find a link or a QR code to your Advent calendar, which is a corno a corno carol for each day of Advent, and it's just
Yeah.
lovely. So thank you so much for that holiday gift.
And
And
can I just give a quick shout out to Matthew Horn? He's a nominative determinism. Matthew Horn is the arranger of the carols I recorded. So he's the one who had the brain power to put these things together. I just played them.
well, what a wonderful gift to the community, and thanks for sharing it with us. I think that it's a beautiful sound all throughout the year, but I mean, especially as we enter the holiday season. I know that that'll be on my playlist. So, well, thank you so much. Happy holidays to you. I'm
And
going to let you
you
get back to your very busy, robust schedule, and I need you to take lots of pictures on social media of horns throughout the world.
will do.
And happy holidays, everybody.